Okay. In this one, let's actually add our buttons. So first thing I want to do actually is make this a little bit prettier since we're a little farther along. So I'm going to change the background colors of the container here from this yellow color back to white. Let's change the background color of this one to white. And then let's change the color of the bubbles to primary, which I think is blue by default. Boom. And now let's make the text white in these bubbles. So let's do text white. Now the text is white. And I also want to make it so when you hover over these buttons, you get a cursor. So the quickest way of doing that I know of is type equals button. And now when we hover over this, we get the cursor. Okay, cool. So let's make a little bit more sense of all this markup that we've got here. So first of all, we've got this card, which is let's call it the letter assembly line, right? That's this. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've been playing Factorio, so that's what I'm going to call it. Letter assembly line. Let's call it the LAL for short. And then we've actually got the bubble container. And then we've got the bubble template. So that makes a little bit more sense. So we kind of know what we're looking at a glance. Well, first of all, this isn't JavaScript, so let's add the right comments by doing control and then /. And then let's save that. Cool. So after our bubble container, we want to add a container for our buttons. And I think that I'm just going to make this a flexbox. .dflex and then .justify content center. And then let's add 3 buttons. So button 3. Oh, nope. Sorry, button times 3. To add 3 buttons. And, well, actually, let me undo that because we're going to have button.btn .btn primary. We'll multiply that by 3. So now we've got 3 buttons. This one, let's call it refresh. This one will be shuffle. And this is submit. So we got 3 buttons. Let's give them a little bit of breathing room. I think I just want to do mr-2 and then mr-2. Yeah, that works. And this container itself, let's add a margin. Let's just add it to the y. Or 3. So now these buttons have a little bit of breathing room. And let's give these some IDs because we're going to end up adding click events to each of these. And the cleanest way of doing that is adding click events to unique IDs. Yeah, let's do that. So ID equals refresh. Refresh. Shuffle. Submit. So now they've got unique IDs. And let's add a click event to this refresh button. So just to kind of organize this a little bit better, let's add an event listener section. So after this is where we'll add all of our click events. This is technically an event. Yeah, that's an event. So we'll add the window.load event here, and then we'll do refresh dot on click. There's also a shorthand just click function. I'm using on click like this, and I'll show you why here in a little bit. So on click, we're going to call this function where we pass in the event, and we're not going to do anything with it, but I'm just going to pass it in case we change our mind in the future. So on click, let's show an alert for now. Oops. Alert, refresh. Refresh was clicked. And that didn't work. Let's see why. The ID is refresh. Refresh on click. Passing in this function where we say alert clicked. Why didn't that work? If I look at the refresh button, it's not showing that there's actually an event on this button. Very strange. Maybe just refresh the page. ID is refresh. Let me make sure that this is actually giving me an object. It is. So now if I copy this JavaScript entirely and paste it in here, you can see now it's got the event. And now it does it. Is it not refreshing the JavaScript for some reason? What did I do? What did I do to deserve this? No, it's showing it. There's a chance that this is getting called before the element actually exists. So for example, if I put this in the window load event, I can guarantee that this DOM element already exists before I try and add the click event, and it works. But I figured that the element would have existed already before this script is even loaded. Evidently, that's not the case. So if I were to move this script, say, in the body, but put it right here, now it works. So it's because the script is actually getting called before the element exists. So I'm fine calling the script here. It's safe to say I'll want all the DOM elements to exist before my script is called. So that's why that wasn't triggering at first. So in the next one, let's actually add the logic for refresh and shuffle. Okay, we've got our buttons, but they don't do anything. Let's fix that. Fortunately for the refresh button, that's going to be pretty easy, because when we're first loading this game, we're populating the bubbles with random letters, right? So we can just call a combination of a few functions, and the refresh should be done. So what do we want to happen when we refresh? We want to populate the random letter array with new letters, and we want to populate the bubbles with those letters. So we can call both of these functions here in the refresh event, or the click event for the refresh button, right? Populate random letter array, and there's going to be one problem with this. Hopefully you can see what it is. Then we also want to populate the bubbles with those letters. So what's the problem with this? Let's save it, hit refresh a couple times, and now let's look at our random letter array. Huh. Ah. Did I click it too many times? Am I in some sort of loop? Stop it. Let me refresh this. I might have just clicked it too many times. Oh, huh. This is what we did wrong. We were stuck in an endless loop. And I'll tell you why. The reason is, let's change this bubble count to 28. More letters than there are in the alphabet. And I hit refresh. I'm stuck in an endless loop right now. Let's see if I end up getting a warning. Or not, sorry, not hit refresh, but let's actually physically refresh the page. I'm stuck in an endless loop right now. And hopefully it gives me some sort of error. Well, what I can do, yep, stuck in an endless loop. And the reason for that is we've got this while loop. In other words, it's going to keep populating this get random letter until it finds a letter that's not already in the array. Once 26 letters are in the array, there's no way of getting a random letter that isn't. There's no new letter to work with. So what we have to do is change this to while random letter array.index of letter isn't -1 and random letter array.length is less than our letters.count or letters.length. So if our random letter array is shorter than or is less than the total length of this list, we know that there's room for more letters to be added. There are some letters we haven't picked. So now that should fix our infinite loop issue, hopefully. Are we still stuck in the loop? Let me change this back to 7. Now 26. Oh. It's supposed to be config. Oops. Alt-Z to wrap the text. Config.letters.length. There we go. So now even if we did like 28, we're not stuck in a infinite loop. Okay, So that's one of the problems addressed. Another problem we have is just calling refresh many times. What the heck? It's not giving us new letters. It keeps appending to the array, and the reason for that is simple. This populate random letters is just going to append to the existing array. What we want to do is when we call populate random letter array, we want to clear anything out that's already in there. So we could do, I think we can just do random letter dot destroy, or we can do random letter r equals an empty array. It might be better to destroy it. Destroy it. Cast it into the fire. All right. So we can just do what we did. So it actually creates a brand new empty array. Yeah, that'll work. So method 2. Lots of different ways of doing this. I don't recommend doing it this way. You could, but it feels like overkill. So this is kind of fun to just look at and kind of get a sense of all of the different ways of emptying an array. But this works just fine the way we're doing it here, just pointing it to a new empty array. So now if we hit refresh, we are indeed getting a new array of 7 letters. Boom. There's one more problem. Or actually, no, there isn't a problem. We're good. I was thinking that we are shuffling. When we shuffle it, we want to make sure that the center letter is staying the same and that everything else around it is swapping places, right? So I think that's a good stopping point for this one because now the refresh button is working. All right. Okay, now the refresh button is working. I think before I get on to the next buttons, let's get some sort of feedback. Let's get rid of this placeholder text here, huh? So first of all, if I get rid of the text entirely, you can see that the size of this card changes. So I wonder not that. Empty set. I mean, there's a couple things that we can do. There's more than a couple. There's many things that we can do. We can leave it empty with some ellipses. There's a 0 white space character. Let's try that. That might work. Let's look at what that looks like. Yeah, so that way we don't have an issue where once we add a letter, the size of the window changes. That might be kind of jarring. So there's probably a cleaner way of doing that. I'm not super worried about it. That works. I usually try avoiding these special HTML characters. Let's see. Can I do... What's this WBR? That works. Okay. I've never used the WBR character. Works for me. All we wanted to do was find a quick way of keeping this window the same size, even if there's no content. So beautiful. Great. let us start populating this with text once we start clicking these letters. So what I want to do is, similar to this random letter array, let's have an array of the letters that we actually chose. Do we want to actually make it an array, or do we just want to have a string that we're just appending characters to? I think that might be easiest, because we know we'll end up converting it into a string of characters once we try and validate whether or not this is a word, right? So let's just make it a string. And we're calling this the letter assembly line. So why don't we just say var LAL word, so the letter assembly line word. And for now, it's just an empty string. Once we start selecting letters, that's when we will append. Once we click on one of these bubbles, we want to do a couple things. We want to add another letter to this LAL word, which I'm actually going to say, because this is an acronym, LAL word. Capitalize it. We want to add letters to that, to this variable, and then refresh this display. So let's do that. Let's add an event listener to the bubbles. So let's do bubble dot on click. So on click, oops. On click, we've got this anonymous function, this arrow function, that takes in the event object. And now let's .log, oops, the target of that event, which should be the actual button. See what happens. Okay, we're clicking the button. Oh, clicking the first button, huh? Here's what's going on. So, because, because we're cloning this first button, I don't think that we're actually cloning the click event for that button. So what's happening is, as soon as this loads, we're adding the click event to this bubble, and then we're cloning the bubble, but I think we're losing the events associated with it after we clone it. So if I were like now to manually copy this and add a click event to these bubbles, you'll see now clicking these subsequent bubbles, the subsequent bubbles have that event. So this is a good opportunity to take a drink of water. And do this a better way. If we look at the jQuery on event, you'll see it optionally takes in a few additional parameters, or there's a few like overload methods for this. So what we want to use is this function, which takes in 3 arguments. The event. What is the event? Is it click? Is it, key press, key up, whatever it is. In this case, it's click. And the selector, a selector, string of filters, a string to filter the descendants of the selected element that will call the handler. So what we really want to do is add this click event to the bubble container, but say, so the click event lives on the container, but we want to say, hey, when one of these descendants in that container is clicked, we want to fire this event. So hopefully that will make more sense when I change this. So what we actually want to do is on the bubble container, we're attaching the click event. So in this case, there's going to be one click event instead of 7. If I bounce back over here, you'll see each of these buttons have their own individual click events. You see? If we had 100 buttons, we've got 100 different events. That's a lot more code. That's a lot more, I guess, JavaScript than there would be if, well, not necessarily more JavaScript, but each of these buttons now becomes more bloated than if we just had one click event on the parent. Because all of these events are the same, right? They're functionally the same. It's just the context changes. Whatever I'm passing into this this event object changes depending on which button I click. But doing it this way, and remember we have an optional second parameter, which is the selector. Let me see if there's an example that they have here that might illustrate this better before I add it. Actually, hold on. I know the way I'm doing it will work. I just want to make sure that I'm illustrating it correctly or explaining it correctly before I add it. So anyways, on click, what are the descendants that I care about? Dot bubble. I care about the bubble. Any descendants with the bubble class. And now you see the event actually lives on the bubble container, but clicking the children triggers that event. So now if I were to add, after the fact, after this event listener has already been created, it is HTML. If I were to add, a few more buttons, you'll see that even though I added a few more buttons that don't have that event on the button themselves, since the listener is on the container, it still triggers the event, okay? So we're logging the button. Let's try logging the letter because we care about the actual letter of this button, right? So a quick way of doing that is let's wrap this e.target in a jQuery object. And well, let's look at the difference here. So you see, originally calling e.target was returning this, the DOM element itself. If I wrap it, what I'm doing here is wrapping it in a jQuery container. So now I have an object. I have a jQuery object, and I can append those. I have access to the jQuery library now. So now I can do e.target and then .val. See what that looks like. See what that gives me. .html, because it's not an input. There we go. Yeah, since it's not an input, there is no value for this. I just want the actual content of the button, the HTML, which is our letters. So now that we've got that, let me save this to a variable. And let's do const letter equals whatever that is, and append it to our LAL word string. So LAL word plus equals letter. Oops. Plus equals letter. And let's see if that works, and look at what LAL word looks like. So letter assembly line word. Let's save that. So right now it's an empty string. I'm clicking letters. Now let's look at LEL word again. It works. Last thing we want to do now is refresh our display, or refresh the letter assembly line. So let's call it function refresh LAL, right? And let's add that function here. Refresh LAL. And all this will do is we'll say well, first of all, we haven't given a unique ID to this letter assembly line. And I think I will give the ID, put the ID right here on the actual card body, because that's what we care about. And let's just call this the LAL, letter assembly line. And we'll do lel.html is our LAL word. See if that works. Boom. Okay. That works. So in the next one, I think what we'll do is give us the ability to actually delete a letter once we add it. Okay. So let me snort a line of air real quick. So we've made pretty good progress. The next thing that we want to do is give us the ability to delete a letter once we add one. I think it makes sense to do that before we get to shuffling, because we're already working on the letter assembly line. So let's stay focused on that before we switch back to the bubbles. That's a very strange sentence, but there it is. So we want to add a delete button, right? How do we want to add that? We could just add another button here. Let's see what happens if we add it before everything. So I'm going to do button danger. ID is delete. Text is delete. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's fine. We've got a row for all of our options. So what we really want to do is when they hit delete, just pop off the last letter from this assembly line, right? So what we could do is if you hit delete, we could just modify the HTML here and just change the HTML itself to be whatever it was minus the last letter, right? But it's important that everything is driven by our LAL word property we have here. So this is a good principle to follow. This LAL word is effectively represents the state of our assembly line, right? And since we've already got that saved in a variable, anything that has to do with how do I want to put this? Rather than modifying the HTML directly, we want to modify the state, which is this LAL word variable, and then make sure everything that cares about that state is updating. That's a design pattern that React uses, right? Where you can pass state into multiple components, and then if you update the state, React will automatically handle regenerating those components or updating those components that care about that state. So even though we're not doing this in React, it's just a nice design pattern to follow. What would you call that? Stateful development. Not necessarily. Hopefully you understand what I was trying to say. There's a specific term for that, and a more academic developer will have the right term for me, I'm sure. So we added that button. Let's add a click event to the delete button. And what do we want to do? We want to clear this. Pop LAL word. Right? I think pop implies that we're popping it from the very end. We could call this like delete last letter from LAL word, but I think that gets the point across. Pop LAL word. Okay, so there's refresh LAL. Let's add function pop LAL word. Okay. Oops. And all we're going to do is, I think I can just straight up do LAL word dot pop. Let's see. Remove the last character of a string. Could do text.slice. I wanted to see if there's like a pop function that I can use. I could convert the string into an array, pop the last value from the array, and then convert it back into a string. Seems like overkill. Or I could just use the slice. 0 is the starting point, second number is the item to remove. Passing a negative number will remove starting from the end. Okay. Great. Dot slice 0, -1. Okay. And we've already got this nice refresh LAL function. So let's see what that did. Delete the on click pop LAL word. Well, first of all, let's make sure our click event is firing, yeah? So if I look at this, if I look at the button, you can see, yes, it is calling pop LAL word. LAL word.slice. Let me refresh this. WHS. Let's look at that LAL word object. Now let's call this. So it's just not removing it. I think it's because I probably have to say LAL word equals. Let me look at that example that I had. Yep. So this isn't going to modify the, okay, it says right there, slice method does not modify the original string. It's going to return a new string with that last letter removed. So all I want to say is set the original string to whatever is returned by this. Okay, so that's good to know. So right now the word is empty. WQB, and that worked. Great. Notice how when we delete the last letter, it gets rid of our little placeholder, element here, our line break, right? So let's add that again. If you click on the delete button, we call pop LAL word, and let's see. So if we call this and LAL word is 0, let's see, refresh LAL. Maybe we want to do it here. So if the length equals 0, let's do LAL to HTML. There's going to be a cleaner way of doing this, and I'll show you here in a second. Equals. There's a cleaner way of doing this. I think I can just straight up do that. But I want to show you the long form way of doing this before we clean this up. Okay. So notice how if the LAL word length is 0, then we're preserving that word break here. But there's a cleaner way of doing this. We don't need this if-else block or this, these if-else statements. We can just do set the HTML to this ternary. Is the word is the length 0? If it is, we'll set the HTML to boom. Otherwise, set to the LAL word. Much cleaner. Make sure that works. Boop, 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 boop. It does, yay. Okay, so that's the functionality for the delete button. Next thing we'll do is shuffle. Let's shuffle.